hardship and hope. Clop, clop, clop. The horse held a steady and cautious pace as it exited the wooded area and entered the town. The woman on the horse rode through the main street of shops and businesses, waving at familiar faces. She wore a dark wool riding skirt and jacket, and her long braids were fastened closely to her head. With her unusually small frame, she looked like a doll mounted on the thoroughbred stallion. The townspeople gestured their respect for her as she passed. She was a skilled courier who delivered items from town to town, often through empty and dangerous territories of the southwestern United States in the 1800s. She thrived on the speed and skill of riding the stallion. The woman was a small rider by any standard, and her dearly loved horse towered over her. She managed him with great speed and dexterity throughout the dry, dusty land. People did not judge her for taking an unorthodox role, because her job was so appreciated and her skill so highly respected. Likewise, her focus was on her work, the love of her horse, and management of the danger that she faced. On one of her routes, she sped across a dusty southwestern stretch, up a rounded hill, and through a set of mesa tables and steeples. This required her rounded hill, and through a set of mesa tables and steeples. This required her to ride slowly, anticipating every step of the stallion's hoof. Her slow pace made her a target for the warring Apache natives, who were known to attack. She rode the pass many times, but on her last ride a group of 5 native men hid in the mesa steeples and overtook her. She was forced to watch as her horse was furiously and senselessly murdered. The woman was raped repeatedly by the leader of the group, a giant in comparison to her small, childlike frame. His face paint and feathered headdress sickened her. She was disgusted and traumatized by his senseless murder of the valuable horse, but not terrified, as he had intended. The band of warring natives left her to die within the steeple pass, but she was able to walk back to her family's ranch. When she arrived and returned to health, she put away her wool suit, cut her hair, and sat in the armchair that looked out to the hills she rode. The rest of her life was spent mourning the horse and her life as a courier. In the backdrop of her life was a stable hand who secretly loved and admired her. He spent the rest of his life watching over her, even though she was inattentive to his presence and love for her. She never moved on past the loss of her youth. I, of course, was that woman. I carried into this lifetime a love for horses and some riding skill, and I practice ever-present compassion and respect for animals. I brought stamina for hardship into this lifetime and can move on with hope, something that I could not do as the horse courier. And, most important, as I observed the sad courier sitting in her armchair, I learned that we must move on after tragedy. There are always gifts, like the loving stable worker, on the other side of difficulty. Alice, time is not measured in minutes or hours or years. Time is measured in lessons learned. Alice has mastered this wisdom. She has learned to overcome grief's power to immobilize, to freeze time, and she is now able to move on. There are always gifts, there is always love on the other side. Human beings create such misery in the world, with their penchant for violence and for killing. Spiritual beings, aware of higher dimensions, multiple lifetimes, and cosmic karma, repair the world by nurturing and protecting all life. As we fully evolve from human beings into spiritual beings, we will comfort and heal each other's pain rather than cause it. Alice easily let go of the sorrow that she had experienced in her prior lifetime as the courier. Michelle, the author of the next story, was able to accomplish a similar feat. It does not matter whether the loss is fresh or ancient, with the awareness of the endurance of our bonds and of our souls, its burden can lighten and disappear in mere moments. Releasing grief. As I stared out at the sea of expectant-looking faces in front of me, my heart began to beat wildly in my chest. I hadn't realized how many people were in the audience until I'd reached the front of the room, where I now sat perched on a chair next to Dr. Brian Weiss. I resisted the urge to look in the direction of my husband, for I could feel him frowning at me. My face felt red and hot as I realized what I had just committed myself to. I was about to be hypnotized in front of several hundred people who were going to watch the whole thing. What if I can't remember a past life? What if I make a total fool of myself? As I had these thoughts, the faces of the former selves that I had seen during the group regressions over the past couple of days began to drift into my mind's eye in a colorful parade. Feeling somewhat reassured, I then looked around the room at the faces of the audience in front of me. They looked friendly and supportive, some even smiling warmly when my eyes brushed past theirs. Dr. Weiss, who had been addressing the audience while I became acclimated to the stage, turned and spoke directly to me. I focused on his instructions, the soothing sound of his voice calming me instantly. "This is going to be okay," I reassured myself. He smiled and nodded at me, as if he had heard my thoughts and was giving his reply. I relaxed a bit in my chair, ready to give myself over to whatever was about to happen. I could hear Dr. Weiss's voice, which seemed quite far away, telling me that I would see a door in front of me. He then informed me that on the other side of that door I would encounter a memory from my childhood. I could hear him counting backward from 3, and in my mind the door began to swing open, just as he had said that it would. I eagerly walked through it in my mind, anxious to discover what I would find on the other side. Stepping into the brilliant light that lay behind the door, I felt as if I needed to blink from the brightness, even though my eyes were firmly shut. I looked down at the floor and saw linoleum with a yellow and white print. There were countertops, cupboards, and a sink with a window above it that was covered. Countertops, cupboards, and a sink with a window above it that was covered with pleasant yellow curtains. The light that streamed in through this window had a sunny, mid-morning quality to it. There was a large olive green refrigerator next to the sink, from which a low humming sound emanated. Dr. Weiss began to question me about what I was experiencing, and when I spoke to answer him, I was surprised to hear that I was using a voice much softer and lower than my usual speech. "I'm in my kitchen," I said, although the room was completely unfamiliar to me. It was not any kitchen that I could remember, and it suddenly dawned on me that it was from the house that we had moved out of when I had been only 3 years old. Upon that realization, I looked down at my own body and saw that I was a baby, sitting up in a high chair. I saw my pudgy legs below me, and I could feel the sticky vinyl seat on my skin. This was clearly from a time well before my earliest memory, which had been around the age of 4. I had never remembered anything at all from the few years that we had lived in the house where I was born. "What is it that you're doing?" Dr. Weiss asked. "Eating applesauce in my high chair." My automatic response surprised me. I could almost taste the bland baby food in my mouth. Then I saw her. She was sitting in a wooden chair in front of me, holding a small spoon in her hand. Her broad smile made her high cheekbones look like 2 rosy apples, and her beautiful green eyes crinkled at the corners. "Mama," I thought, as the tears started to run down my cheeks. "My mother is with me," I whispered. The moment the words left my lips, I felt an overwhelming sense of love. Was that really my mother? I did not think that I could remember her, but there she was, sitting in front of me. My heart was so full of emotion that I felt as if it would burst as I sat there looking at her. She had died so long ago, this woman who gave me life and who left me with no working memories of her whatsoever. Yet here she was in front of me, cooing and smiling. It almost felt as if I were truly in that kitchen and that I had been transported back in time. She was real, and I was there with her. I sat with my eyes closed, savoring the feeling of being cared for by her. She was there with me, she who did not live to watch me grow into the woman that I had become, she who had left a large gaping hole inside me. I had missed her every day, despite the fact that I could never even picture what her face had looked like. My joy in the moment that I beheld her was indescribable. Gazing at her smiling face, I could feel how much she loved me, how much gazing at her smiling face, I could feel how much she loved me, how much she had loved being a mother, and how much she enjoyed spending time with me. I could hear her speaking in a soft, soothing voice, and the sound of my name escaping her lips was the most beautiful noise that I had ever heard. The tears continued to fall as there was nothing save that moment of pure bliss. But I was fully aware that it was only a memory. Oh, how I longed for her! I could then again hear the kind voice of Dr. Weiss, telling me that it was time to leave the scene behind. My heart ached at the thought, but I was willing to do as he asked. His words were gentle, prodding me onward and promising me that I would remember the scene. This memory had been brought to the surface after having been buried deep in my subconscious for so long. I knew, without a doubt, that the image of my mother's face would never fade from me again. He instructed me to move back through the door that I had constructed in my mind, and as I did, the scene in the yellow kitchen instantly disappeared. Feeling strangely effervescent, almost as if I had been charged with electric energy, I had never been so completely alert or alive, though my body was a limp and nearly useless object on the chair. Suddenly, a second door appeared in front of me and opened. The moment I went through it, I was hit by a strong smell that was instantly recognizable as the salty scent of sea air. I am near the ocean, I thought, although I was aware of the fact that, physically, I was indoors inside a conference room. Upon being instructed to look down, I saw a pair of dirty, bare feet. My clothes consisted of a burlap sack that had been crafted into a makeshift pair of pants, which were tied onto me with a rope at my waist. I could feel the coarse material against my legs. I could hardly believe what I saw when I looked at my hands. My fingers were fat, and my hands were massive, filthy, and calloused. They belonged to a man, one who used them to do very hard work. Whose hands are these? The answer came with complete assurance from deep within me, and it spread over my entire being. These were my hands. I looked around me, and right away I could see the ships. I was on a wooden dock surrounding a seaport of some kind, and I was unloading heavy barrels from the ships, which had just arrived from the New World. The year 1689 popped into my head, firmly appearing as if from nowhere, as did the name of the port city, Barcelona. Rum was being imported from the New World inside these heavy barrels under which I struggled. The work was difficult and physically taxing, but I didn't mind it too much or feel the need to complain. I was not very intelligent, and perhaps I did not know any kind of work other than this backbreaking labor. As Dr. Weiss moved me on from the scene, I saw myself inside a small, wooden, shack-like structure with a dirt floor, my home. The house was only one room, and I could tell that we were extremely poor. At one end there was a stone fireplace, in which a large, black metal pot hung over a fire. Something pungent was cooking in the pot. Several mattresses stuffed with straw were on the floor in one corner, and a few rough blankets lay on top of them. I immediately sensed several presences in the house with me. Turning, I saw 3 small children standing there, all dressed in dirty rags. The connection that I felt to them was so palpable that it nearly choked me. I could not see their eyes, as their faces were fuzzy and out of focus. Their familiarity, however, was undeniable, and I knew beyond any doubt that these were my children. I loved these 3 little souls, whom I had never met, with all my heart. I looked again toward the fireplace and saw a pleasant-looking woman in a long dress. She had a white cap on her head, and she was busily stirring something in the pot over the fire. She was my wife. A lump formed in my throat from love and longing as I gazed at her. She turned around, and I was momentarily startled to see that, unlike the children, the details of her face were very clear. I looked deep into this woman's eyes, and the recognition instantly washed over me. It was my mother. Nearly in disbelief, I sat there and watched her in my mind's eye. She had the same eyes and even the same distinct apple-like cheekbones that she had in this life. But even more powerful than her appearance, I could feel her energetically. This beloved wife of mine was the same woman who had given birth to me in this life. I knew it in the core of my being. As I gazed at her, I could feel how much we loved each other. I started to see scenes of our life together, moving in rapid succession as they painted a beautiful picture of a relationship based on mutual adoration. She greeted me each evening with a warm smile and an embrace after my long day of difficult labor. Although we were impoverished and it was an endless struggle to survive, we were so happy together. She accepted our simple life with all of its difficulties. This is what real love is. A flicker of a thought entered my mind, a sudden realization that my current marriage seemed quite second-rate in comparison. This is what I want, I said to myself as I basked in the perfect, balanced, and spiritual love that I had with this woman. Finding real love is the most important thing we can do in life. And then when we find it, we must give it in return. The thought floated into my mind on a current that felt like a song. Did I just think that? I wondered, as it had been a much wiser message than I thought I knew how to deliver. Moving ahead a few years in time, I saw myself in that same house. I stood on that dirt floor as a choking sadness hit me like a dull knife. My wife was lying in the corner on one of the straw mattresses, covered by a rough blanket. She was very ill. Her skin looked grey, and her cough kept startling me out of what I could feel was a downward spiral of grief and anguish. I had tried everything that I could to help her, but our extreme poverty prevented any real medical care. She was about to die. As I acknowledged this, my ever-extending grief spiral darkened as I realized how angry I was. I was being pulled down into a sheer misery that was unlike anything I had ever known. My rage mixed with unimaginable sadness and then flowed out of me, leaving behind a numb emptiness. I was sitting in a chair, staring into space, fully wrapped up inside my dark emotions. My 3 children were there, huddled together in the corner. I could feel their fear as they held on to each other and watched their dying mother. Not working to comfort my still young children in any way or nurture them through what was undeniably a painful and frightening experience, I remained seated at my table. Watching myself sit there and ignore my children, I started to get upset at the way that I had dealt with this. Why aren't I holding them? I wondered, remembering how much I loved them. This is wrong, they need me. Shame filled me as I looked at their faces. Turning back to the corner where my wife was, I saw that she had died. Her eyes stared out lifelessly from her grey body. I did not move from my chair toward her to comfort my children, who were now wailing. Instead, I just sat and stared into space as if it were my body that was now lifeless, not my beloved wife's. Images began floating into my mind, showing me the years directly after her death. I became withdrawn and bitter, spending my time alone and miserable. I lost my spark and my love for life, and I never regained that part of myself. My work, which I hadn't minded before, now seemed like drudgery. My evenings were spent sitting in my chair, staring into space. I could feel my incredible loneliness, despite the fact that I still had 3 children who needed me more than ever to care for them. How selfish of me, I thought, as a feeling of remorse washed over me. I loved them. Why was I neglecting them? I moved ahead to the last day of that lifetime and immediately felt a crushing pressure on my chest. The sensation was so intense that I had to remind myself where I was, that it was impossible that something could actually be crushing me. It felt so real, and I fought the panic that began to creep in. It was hard to breathe, and my chest rose and fell with great effort. The air smelled of the sea once more. I was back on the docks where I worked. There was confusion as to what was happening. And then, instantly, I was lighter. As I drew a breath, the oxygen filled my lungs with much more ease. The sensation that had made my chest seem so heavy was gone, and I could then see what was happening, as it was no longer dark around me. I was floating above the body of this man that I had been. He was lying lifeless on the ground, a few of those heavy barrels on top of his body. They had fallen down from the ship above and had accidentally landed on top of him, completely crushing his chest. I felt light as air as I hovered above this terrible scene of my death. The contrast between the heaviness I had felt in this body and the complete weightlessness I was now experiencing stunned me. It was as if I were made of nothing, yet I knew that I was still very much who it is that I am. My broken body lay useless and abandoned, but I still existed. I began to move upward, feeling beautiful and free, experiencing an elation unlike any I had ever known. A bright light appeared in the distance. It was in front of me but higher, in clouds that began to thin into mist. The colors inside these misty clouds were of every imaginable hue and so vivid I knew they could not be perceived by any human eyes. I could feel myself being gently drawn toward this incredibly brilliant light, and a tremendous, peaceful feeling washed over me as I gazed at it. A strange humming sound increased in intensity the closer I came to the light, vibrating through my whole being. This electric vibration consumed me, and it felt like I was being recharged. There did not seem to be an edge where the light began, it just gradually enveloped me until the light and I had merged. It was as if I were the light, even though I still had a sense of myself and where my own boundaries lay. I was home once again, back where I belonged, feeling completely at peace. And then I saw her. She was standing there, looking expectantly at me with her warm smile and her rosy apple cheeks. My mother, who had been my wife, was waiting for me. Upon seeing her, I felt an overwhelming love unlike wife, was waiting for me. Upon seeing her, I felt an overwhelming love unlike anything I knew I was capable of outside this light. She did not say a word but just embraced me fully, as my nothingness fell completely into hers. We had no human form to prevent our complete connection, and our pure love passed directly into each other. I was filled with her, and she with me. In this state of complete bliss, I heard Dr. Weiss ask a question. What is the lesson that you learned from this life that is important for you to know in your current life? I didn't even have to think of the answer, as a wave of remorse returned for my actions as that man. People die, it is a part of life, I said. You cannot let your loss keep you from living your life to its fullest. My children needed me, yet I could not escape my own grief to be there for them. It's important to grieve our losses, but then we must accept them and move on. After I finished the last sentence, the connection to my current life became clear. I had lost my mother to Hodgkin's lymphoma in 1977 and had spent the better part of my formative years grieving her. It had been especially difficult the last few years after having become a mother myself. The loss of her felt constant and inescapable. At that moment, I was ready to put my grief aside and move on with my life. I knew beyond any doubt that I would see her again and that our love for each other would never die. Feeling a heaviness lift from my heart, I acknowledged that I would always miss her but that it was time to release her. I had never felt so free as the tears flowed down my cheeks. My deep sorrow had been replaced with a warm comfort. I had experienced firsthand that she continues to exist and always will. As I emerged from the hypnotic state, I took a very deep breath and then slowly opened my eyes. Blinking to bring the room in which I was physically present back into focus, I immediately noticed that something was different. In front of me were the hundreds of faces I had seen earlier that had witnessed this incredible experience, only now, they each appeared to have a soft and ethereal glow emanating from them. These glows appeared in various shades and colors, the perimeter stretching farther away from some than others. Scanning the audience, I tingled from head to toe as I beheld this glorious and otherworldly vision. Auras. I had never seen anything so beautiful as these people, and still feeling light and energized, I absorbed each one with awe. Michelle Brock, in her beautiful and comprehensive description of the cycles of life and death and life again, Michelle confirms and validates Alice's lesson and the very same wisdom perceived by Amy's client, Jessica. Jessica said, "We are not supposed to be miserable. There was so much good she could have done." Alice said, "We must move on after tragedy. There are always gifts on the other side of difficulty." Michelle knew deeply that it was important to grieve our losses, but then we must accept them and move on. Each saw and felt the paralysis that grief could cause, each saw and felt the pain and the waste that this paralysis could cause. Michelle believed that she had no memories of her mother. Yet within minutes, and even in the potentially uncomfortable position of being on stage in front of many observers, she was vividly recalling detailed scenes. Her remembrances were not only visual. She could feel the vinyl seat, she could taste the bland applesauce, she could hear her mother's soft voice, and she became overwhelmed with emotion. The decades-long separation from her mother was bridged in an instant, and her loneliness and grief would never again be so severe. We can remember everything. Just like Michelle, we harbor a wealth of memories in the locked treasure chest of our subconscious mind. They have been forgotten, but not lost. They can always be reclaimed. To unlock the chest and to recapture the scenes and images of our loved ones when they were young and healthy, we only need the key. The key is this regression technique, so safe and so simple. And then we too can once again see their smiling faces, feel their arms around us, smell their perfume, and bask in their love. Furthermore, we can access a particular past life as often as we wish and as often as we need, just as we can with any conscious memory. Perhaps not all lessons and understandings from the lifetime experienced during a regression can be extracted the first time. We can go back to recover more details or to explore the life at deeper levels. There is no expiration date on a memory. But our dear ones are not just memories. Their souls survive the death of the physical body. Michelle was twice reunited with her mother's soul, in addition to the wonderful reunion on the other side, her mother waiting for her in the light. We never lose our loved ones. I am reminded of what I have heard and experienced so many times with my patients. Whether the message is heard in a dream in which the departed loved one appears, in a meditation, during a regression, or just being whispered into your ear, as Richard whispered into the ears of Lee and the boys, it is remarkably clear and consistent. Do not grieve so. Soulmate, this is a part of Zindagi Ki Roshni consultancy. It has been established for those who have lost someone and for those who are very sad in their life. About 100 PDF books and 20 short audio books of this topic will be sent to those who join it. This data will be sent to their email or WhatsApp. If you want to join this organization, then please send WhatsApp message to this number.